It was late autumn, 1943. The North Atlantic had grown colder, darker, a gray, endless expanse of moving steel. The wind howled across the surface, tearing at the white-tipped waves. Far below, in the quiet belly of U-190, the hum of diesel engines faded as the submarine descended beneath the storm. For weeks, the crew had been running from something they couldn't quite define. A new kind of enemy. Sonar pings had become their constant companions, rhythmic, methodical, precise, unlike the crude acoustic sounds they had learned to evade earlier in the war. This new pulse had a different tone, shorter, faster, sharper. It seemed to echo through the steel of the boat like the heartbeat of a machine that was alive. Captain Lieutenant Hans Keller, commander of U-190, leaned over the sound operator's shoulder. "Report," he whispered. The hydrophone operator, a thin man named Otto Brenner, adjusted his headset and frowned. "Herr Calhoun, it's not a ship. It's stationary." Keller's brow furrowed. "Stationary? Out here?" "Yes, sir. No propeller noise. No cavitation, just this." He turned a dial, and through the narrow loudspeaker came a faint series of rhythmic beeps, hollow, mechanical, repeating every 2 seconds. The crew listened in silence. The sound wasn't like any allied sonar they knew. Keller stood upright. "Mark the position. Surface when ready." Moments later, the U-boat broke through the stormy surface. Water cascaded off the conning tower. Under the pale moonlight, something floated less than 100 meters away, a small, round device bobbing gently in the waves. It was no mine. It had a long antenna protruding upward like an insect's feeler, and beneath it, a cylindrical metal body half submerged. Keller stared through his binoculars. "What in God's name is that?" The first officer hesitated. "Could it be a bomb, sir?" "No, it's transmitting." Keller's mind raced. He had heard rumors, intercepted Allied communications referring to buoys, devices used to detect submarines, but the idea seemed impossible. How could something so small hunt a U-boat in the middle of the ocean? Still, curiosity outweighed fear. Keller ordered a small recovery team out onto the deck. Ropes lashed in the wind as the crew pulled the mysterious device aboard. The object was heavier than expected, coated with salt and oil, but its markings were clear. U.S. Navy property of Bureau of Ships. Keller knelt beside it as the rain hammered down. The device hummed faintly, still alive, still listening. "This," Keller said quietly, "is how they find us." The men looked at each other, the weight of realization sinking in. For months, the Allies had grown frighteningly accurate at tracking U-boats. Convoys seemed to turn away before they could even strike. Depth charges fell too perfectly, too quickly now. Here lay the answer, floating innocently in the sea. By the time U-190 returned to the French port of Lorient, the strange American device was already the talk of the base. Officers from Kriegsmarine Command and Naval Research Division crowded the pier, eager to see the silent weapon that had hunted their submarines. The sonobuoy, now drained, dried, and carefully dismantled, lay on a steel workbench inside a dimly lit bunker. Around it stood a group of engineers from Telefunken and AEG, two of Germany's top electronics firms. Among them was Dr. Heinrich Vogt, an acoustics specialist whose calm demeanor hid an obsessive curiosity for sound. He lifted the cylindrical housing and peered inside. "Remarkable," he murmured. "It's modular. Look at these compartments." The team leaned closer. The interior was divided into precise sections, each sealed with rubber gaskets to keep out seawater. Inside the upper section, a battery pack and a tiny vacuum tube transmitter, set neatly connected to the vertical antenna. In the lower half, a microphone array suspended in oil to absorb shock and improve underwater reception. "This," Vogt said, tapping the microphone with his gloved finger, "is not just a hydrophone. It's a tuned listening instrument, sensitive enough to detect low-frequency cavitation noise from propellers, even miles away." One of the Telefunken technicians frowned. "But, Herr Doctor, how does it send the signal back? Underwater transmission, it doesn't." Vogt interrupted. "That's the brilliance. The Americans drop hundreds of these from aircraft. They float. The microphones hang below the surface. The signal is transmitted upward, by radio, back to the aircraft circling above. The plane hears what the buoy hears. The room went silent. It was an elegant solution. Painfully simple, yet terrifyingly effective. Germany had poured resources into submarine stealth, believing that the greatest threat came from sonar on ships. But this was different. The ocean itself had been turned into a network of listening ears. Vogt turned to the commanding officer from Berlin, Captain Sir C. Wilhelm Albrecht. Herr Captain, he said, this is more dangerous than radar. The Allies have built a system that listens to the sea. They no longer need to see us. Albrecht frowned. You're saying they can track our boats even without contact? Yes. These buoys are disposable, cheap, and networked. One aircraft could scatter a dozen in a patrol area, and each one could silently feed back our location. Albrecht clenched his jaw. Then how do we stop it? Vogt exhaled slowly. That is the question. He gestured toward the buoy's circuitry. This transmitter, it operates at around 150 megacycles. I estimate that's in the VHF range. We could attempt jamming, but he trailed off. The Allies change frequencies often. And this, he pointed at a small component sealed in resin. This is likely a crystal oscillator. They can mass produce them with precision. We cannot. There was a heavy pause. The room smelled of oil and ozone. The engineers exchanged uneasy glances. For the first time in the war, the Germans realized that the Battle of Sound had already begun, and they were behind. That night, in the base's mess hall, Keller sat alone at a corner table, a cup of black coffee in front of him. Around him, the other U-boat captains drank and joked, trying to drown out the inevitable truth that lingered in every conversation. Fewer submarines were returning each month. He pulled a small notepad from his coat and scribbled, "The ocean used to be our ally. Now it listens for us." By early 1944, the mood within Germany's Kriegsmarine research division had shifted from curiosity to quiet panic. Every intercepted report from the Atlantic confirmed the same pattern. Submarines vanishing without warning. Crews never reporting back. Convoy routes that once promised easy prey now swallowed U-boats whole. In the laboratories of Kiel and Brest, engineers bent over benches cluttered with wires, coils, and glass tubes. The captured American sonobuoy lay in pieces, copied and redrawn dozens of times. They called it the Schwimmen's Horchgerät, the floating listening device. Dr. Heinrich Vogt, now heading the countermeasures group, stood in front of a chalkboard filled with waveforms and radio spectrums. The Allies, he explained to a small group of naval officers, are creating what we might call an acoustic net. It's not a single device that hunts you, it's a system. Aircraft, buoys, and ships, all listening together. Once you make a sound, they triangulate you. Captain Albrecht rubbed his temples. Then silence is our only defense. Vogt nodded. Yes, but true silence is impossible. Even when we shut down engines, the ocean hears us breathe. The men fell silent. They all knew the truth. The U-boats were no longer hunters. They were being hunted by sound itself. By March, the Kriegsmarine High Command authorized a secret program, Project Nebelmeer. Fog C. Its goal, to develop acoustic decoys and radio noise generators to confuse the Allied listening. Network. In a bunker outside Hamburg, technicians worked day and night. They built small canisters that, when released, emitted recorded propeller sounds, false echoes that mimicked U-boats moving in another direction. They also experimented with a crude sonar jammer, codenamed Juan's bug, that blasted random frequencies into the water. But these inventions had limits. They were heavy, unreliable, and power-hungry. And the Allies, always listening, were adapting faster. Meanwhile, on the other side of the Atlantic, at a facility in San Diego, American engineers at the Naval Research Laboratory were refining their latest model, the CRT-1A sonobuoy. It was lighter, longer lasting, and equipped with a more sensitive hydrophone. that could detect even the subtle creak of a U-boat. Hull under pressure. A memo from 1944 captured their confidence. Each buoy dropped as an invisible patrolman, each whisper of the sea, a report of the enemy. Every time the Americans improved their design, they released tens of thousands across the Atlantic. What had begun as an experiment now blanketed the ocean, a web of sound and silence that stretched from Iceland to the Azores. U-190 was ordered to patrol again, this time north of Ireland. But the crew was different now, quieter, more cautious. Every sound felt like a confession. Keller stood in the control room, eyes on the sonar operator. "Report," he whispered. The young operator turned, pale under the dim red light. "Nothing yet, Herr Calhoun. But there's interference. Not static, something rhythmic." "Show me." He leaned over the sonar screen. The faint pulse was steady, mechanical, not a ship, not a whale. Keller recognized it instantly. "It's them," he said softly. "They've dropped the ears again." The boat slowed to a crawl. Engines cut. Silence filled the hull. For hours, they drifted, submerged, unseen, listening to the slow heartbeat of their invisible predator above. Outside, in the black water, the American sonobuoys floated, patient and unblinking. Back in keel, Dr. Vogt received Keller's report with a grim expression. He turned to his assistant, lighting a cigarette. "We are fighting ghosts," he said. "The Allies no longer chase our steel. They chase our sound." He paused, then added quietly, "And soon, they will not even need that." By late 1944, the Atlantic had changed. To the men who sailed beneath its surface, it was no longer a sea. It was a graveyard filled with invisible watchers. Every creak of metal, every hiss of compressed air might mean death. At Kriegsmarine headquarters in Berlin, reports from the Atlantic arrived daily, pages filled with the same grim pattern: U-boat missing, no contact since departure, presumed lost. The oceans were growing silent, not from peace, but from the absence of returning voices. In a laboratory near Portsmouth, England, a team of allied engineers studied maps marked with concentric circles and arcs, sonar ranges plotted like fingerprints on blue paper. One of them, Lieutenant Commander Alan Rice, a radar and acoustics expert, pointed to the Atlantic sector. "If we stagger the sonobuoys every 5 miles, he explained, "we can blanket an entire patrol zone." "It's a listening curtain." His superior raised an eyebrow. "You mean we can trap them acoustically?" Rice nodded. "Exactly. The buoys feed signals to patrol aircraft, mostly Sunderland flying boats and Liberators fitted with new receivers. When the sound aligns between 3 buoys, we get a fix." He paused, glancing at a small black box on the desk. Inside was the receiver unit that captured the signals from the buoys. "With each drop," Rice added, "the ocean becomes more like a network and less like wilderness." Far below that same Atlantic curtain, U-190 lurked once again. Her crew had become shadows of their former selves, gaunt faces, hollow eyes, every sound magnified by fear. They had learned to measure survival not in days, but in minutes of silence. "Depth 120 meters. The navigator whispered. Keller nodded, barely breathing. They had detected the same faint rhythm again, the pulsing whisper of allied sonobuoys overhead. The radio operator, his headphones pressed tight, turned slowly. "It's everywhere now, Herr Calhoun," he said. "Like rain, but made of sound." Keller gave no order to surface. He knew that if they moved too fast, the sea would betray them. Outside the steel hull, bubbles drifted like snow through the black water. Somewhere above, unseen aircraft circled in patient loops, their engines distant thunder. Then, without warning, the sonar operator froze. "Ping, close." Bearing to 1-5, Keller whispered, "Evasive pattern." Now the engines growled to life, and the U-boat rolled hard to port, too loud, too sudden. Seconds later, a deeper sound erupted, a metallic thunder that tore through the water. "Depth charges." The hull groaned. Lights flickered. Men clutched pipes as the ocean roared around them. Then silence. Only the sound of dripping condensation remained. Keller stared at the ceiling, his breath shaking. "They don't chase us anymore," he whispered. "They listen until we move." Weeks later, at a high-level meeting in Berlin, Dr. Vogt presented his latest findings. Behind him, on the projector screen, were graphs of recorded oceanic noise, spikes of frequency patterns mapped to Allied patrol routes. "This is not random," he said. "The Allies are building something far beyond sonar. They are mapping the ocean, learning it, teaching machines to distinguish our engines from the sea itself." One officer scoffed. "Machines cannot think, Doctor." Vogt's eyes narrowed. "Perhaps not yet, but they can listen, and that is worse." He drew a circle on the board, a symbol of the Atlantic, and within it, smaller dots representing U-boats. "Every loss teaches them something new. Every sound we make becomes part of their knowledge." He turned back to the room. "We are fighting not a fleet, but an intelligence that grows with every echo." That night, as he walked through the quiet streets of Berlin, the air raid sirens wailed again. Vogt looked to the sky, thinking of the sea. Both were filled with hunters the Germans could no longer see, machines that never slept, never hesitated. And for the first time, he understood the truth. The ocean had become self-aware, not in mind, but in memory, through the relentless years of human invention. Winter, 1945. The Atlantic was gray and heavy with storm. Each wave broke like the sound of artillery, and the sky above seemed just as hostile as the sea below. Inside U-190, the crew huddled in darkness. The diesel engines had long since gone quiet, replaced by the slow heartbeat of the electric motors whispering through the water. The men no longer joked. They no longer spoke. They simply listened for the faint hum that told them the world above was still hunting. The new kind of warby now. The Allies had perfected their invisible weapon. Each convoy crossing the Atlantic was escorted not only by ships and aircraft, but by sound. Entire grids of sonobuoys were laid ahead of routes weeks in advance, their signals monitored by vast listening stations in Londonderry, Nova Scotia, and Newfoundland. Every whisper of the ocean was recorded, filtered, analyzed, and from those frequencies emerged patterns, propeller signatures, hull vibrations, pressure changes. Each submarine had a voice, and the Allies had learned to recognize them all. Dr. Vogt's reports reached Berlin too late to matter. His final paper, Über den akustischen Krieg, on the acoustic war, was archived by a weary bureaucracy, already collapsing under Allied bombs. In it, he wrote, "The ocean has become language. Every ship speaks, every depth charge answers. Victory will belong to those who understand the silence between them." U-190's final patrol, March 3, 1945, North Atlantic, south of Iceland. Keller stood in the control room, staring at the sonar screen. A faint echo pulsed in the dark, rhythmic, distant. He knew what it was. "Contact?" asked the sonar operator. Keller shook his head. "No, it's just listening." Hours passed. The sea outside remained eerily calm, but the sound persisted, a low, steady tone that came and went like breathing. Then, through the static of the hydrophones, a strange silence spread, too perfect, too clean. Every man in the control room froze. Keller's hand trembled on the chart table. "They've found us." The silence was the warning. Moments later, the ocean erupted. Explosions thundered from every direction, shaking the hull, crushing the air from their lungs. The U-boat twisted, groaned, and began to tilt nose down as emergency lights flickered. Keller ordered, "Blow ballast, surface," but it was too late. Through the thin steel walls, they could hear the ocean rushing in. Berlin, April 1945. In the ruins of Berlin, Dr. Vogt worked by candlelight in a basement laboratory. He had one of the sonobuoys beside him, its outer shell scarred from dissection. He placed a hand on the cold metal. "This," he whispered, "is the future of war. Machines that do not fire, do not bleed, but listen." He wrote his final note before the Allied artillery reached the city. "We were masters of silence, until silence itself turned against us. When the shelling began, he remained at his desk, and somewhere in the Atlantic, The last surviving U-boats scuttled themselves in surrender. The war of sound had ended, but it had already shaped the wars yet to come. Epilogue: the legacy of sound after the war. The Americans expanded their acoustic warfare research into a massive surveillance network called SOSUS, a permanent underwater listening system that stretched across the Atlantic and Pacific. Many of the ideas came directly from the sonobuoy experiments of World War II, the same devices that had haunted Keller's crew and fascinated Dr. Vogt. By the 1950s, SOSUS could track submarines anywhere on Earth. It would become one of the Cold War's greatest secrets, born from those desperate nights of 1944, when silence was deadliest of all. In the archives of the U.S. Navy lies a brief memo dated 1946, declassified decades later. It reads, "Acoustic warfare proved decisive in the Atlantic campaign. The ocean spoke, and we learned to listen. The ocean remembers every sound ever made, and in its depths, the ghosts of those who once listened still wait."